Deep in the Florida Everglades, a trail camera captured something scientists said could never happen. A full-grown Burmese python, 13 feet long, over 50 pounds, was found dead. Not from hunters or disease, but from an attack by a native predator, believed too small to challenge it. For decades, the python has ruled this ecosystem unchecked. But this footage may prove nature is finally pushing back. What killed it shouldn't be possible. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe so we can uncover more stories nature tried to hide. The footage was recorded in the pre-dawn humidity of Big Cypress National Preserve, an area most people never see except through grainy research files. The python featured in the recording was well known to biologists. Tagged during a monitoring study and nicknamed Loki, it measured over 13 feet and weighed approximately 52 pounds. Tracked for months, it moved slowly through the marsh with the casual confidence of a predator with no natural enemies. Then, one morning, the signal from Loki's tracking device went still. Researchers arrived expecting to find a malfunction. Instead, they found silence. Loki's massive body was sprawled across the grass, motionless. The most shocking detail was not the death itself, but the condition in which the snake was found. Its head was missing, sheared away and tucked under a layer of pine needles nearby. No gunshot, no trap, no evidence of human interference. Whatever had done this had closed in silently and finished the kill cleanly. Veteran biologists examined the carcass and struggled to reconcile what they were seeing. Burmese pythons are apex predators with almost no natural threats in Florida. They typically overwhelm opponents through brute force, constricting with up to 90 pounds of pressure per square inch. For years, reports confirmed the python as the undisputed ruler of the Everglades. But this carcass told a different story. When the trail camera footage was reviewed, what emerged altered everything. A native bobcat, estimated to weigh barely 25 pounds, was captured approaching the python, circling, then launching an attack. Experts hesitated to believe it at first. The predator was less than half the python's mass. The footage confirmed it anyway, and that's when researchers realized nature had quietly shifted the equation. Long before that bobcat appeared on camera, the Burmese python had established complete control over the Everglades. Their rise was not sudden, but silent. In 1992, when Hurricane Andrew shredded southern Florida, it damaged a reptile breeding facility near Miami. Surviving snakes slipped into nearby wetlands. At the same time, thousands of exotic pythons purchased as pets were being quietly released by overwhelmed owners who discovered too late that the docile hatchling they bought could reach 20 feet and exceed 200 pounds. Whether through a single industrial escape or countless personal decisions, the result was the same. A foreign predator entered a system unprepared for it. The Everglades provided everything the python needed: warm temperatures, slow, shallow water, unprotected prey. Mammals that had evolved with no defense against constriction became easy targets. A landmark study found raccoon populations down by more than 99% in areas heavily overrun. Opossums fell by nearly 99% as well. Bobcats dropped over 87%. When people returned to roads once busy with native wildlife, they found nothing. The predators had not only arrived, they had consumed the silence itself. Biologists documented pythons swallowing full-grown deer. Alligators occasionally resisted, but were more often victims themselves. No predator native to Florida could reliably overpower one. For over 2 decades, the python stood at the top of the food chain without challenge. Estimates today range from 100,000 to over 300,000 snakes living in the wetlands. Several generations born entirely in the wild, hunting, breeding, expanding without resistance. So when Loki was found dead, killed by something weighing less than half his size, it conflicted with everything known about the hierarchy of the Everglades. A system shaped by fear had just shown its first sign of reversal. While the python devastated mammals above ground, another threat was moving unnoticed beneath the surface. It didn't slither, it spread. During necropsy exams on native snake species, researchers began finding something alarming inside the lungs. Small, pale worms, dozens in some cases, hundreds in others, embedded in the airway tissue. Snakes were being found emaciated, gasping, slowly suffocating. The invader was identified as Rhylietiella orientalis, commonly known as the snake lungworm. Its original host, the Burmese python. In Asia, the python and this parasite evolved together. Over generations, the python developed resistance. In Florida, however, this microscopic threat entered an ecosystem unprepared to combat it. Native snakes lacked any defense. The parasite's life cycle unfolded with disturbing efficiency. Eggs passed in python droppings. Insects consumed the waste. Frogs and lizards ate the insects. Native snakes consumed the amphibians. Once inside their bodies, larvae burrowed through the stomach wall and migrated into the lungs, feeding as they grew. Veteran biologists described finding native snakes with airways packed so densely that they could no longer breathe. Some examined specimens with open lesions and internal hemorrhaging. In severe cases, worms were seen writhing inside the mouth as the host struggled in its final moments. What the python had hunted on the land, the parasite was consuming from within. More troubling was what came next. The parasite no longer depended on the python to survive. It had established itself in native species, already spreading across counties. Even if every python somehow disappeared overnight, the parasite would remain, embedded within the system, expanding independently. The python had reshaped the Everglades by force. The parasite was rewriting it from the inside. What no one expected was that nature was already preparing a response. By the early 2010s, the silence in the Everglades could no longer be ignored. Entire stretches where biologists once counted dozens of raccoons, rabbits, and possums now showed nothing but tracks of pythons sliding through mud. The response was blunt and desperate. In 2013, Florida launched the Python Challenge, a public hunt inviting anyone willing to wade through the swamps. In pursuit of the growing menace, cash rewards, televised coverage, and record-breaking snake catches followed. In 2024, 800 hunters captured 195 pythons. A year later, 294. But to scientists watching the numbers, these victories were illusions, with population estimates ranging from 100,000 to over 300,000 snakes. Those annual totals barely scratched 0.3% of the invasion. So the state pivoted. Dozens of professionally contracted hunters were deployed full-time. Since 2017, over 23,000 pythons have been removed. Impressive on paper, devastatingly inadequate in reality. For every python caught, experts estimated up to 20 more hatched, hidden among reeds or beneath the roots of cypress trees. Technology entered the battlefield next. Drones equipped with thermal imaging flew above the wetlands, attempting to spot snakes by their heat signature, but pythons are cold-blooded masters of adaptation. They matched the temperature of their environment, appearing as nothing more than another warm patch of mud. Dense foliage made infrared scans nearly useless. Engineers tried robotic prey, fake rabbits emitting heat and squeaks. The snakes didn't chase, they waited. The bait failed. Even when researchers used Judas snakes, large males implanted with radio trackers designed to lead them to breeding females, the strategy only removed isolated nests. Expensive, slow, and often unpredictable. It became clear this wasn't just a hunt, it was a war against an enemy evolving faster than the tools deployed to stop it. What came next sounded more like folklore than science, until footage proved otherwise. For decades, the Burmese python held the Everglades in a quiet chokehold. It was the perfect invader. Silent, patient, and nearly untouchable, biologists would say, "You don't see a python until it chooses to let you." Hunters described the moment of contact as like stepping into an ambush. The python did not retreat. Everything else did. But in late 2023, a camera positioned deep within Big Cypress National Preserve captured something that shattered the narrative. It began like any routine tracking check. A 52-pound male python, known to researchers as Loki, was part of a monitored breeding study. Fitted with a GPS transmitter, Loki routinely appeared on tracking monitors, gliding through marsh and longleaf scrub with movements calculated and slow. But on a crisp December morning, his beacon signal suddenly stopped moving. The team expected to find a transmitter malfunction. What they found instead forced silence. Loki lay motionless across a bed of flattened sawgrass. But it wasn't the stillness that stunned the biologists. His head was missing, cleanly severed, not torn, not crushed, chewed. Nearby pine needles covered what remained of the serpent's skull, as if something had tried to drag or hide it. Initially, theories swirled. A panther? A gator? Maybe an airboat strike? The forensics disagreed. This was a targeted kill. 3 days later, a trail camera positioned 20 yards away revealed the impossible. The attacker was not a panther, not a gator. It was a bobcat, a native bobcat estimated to weigh barely 25 pounds, half the python's weight. Frame by frame, the footage showed the bobcat circling Loki, tested by cold weather likely reducing the snake's reflex speed, then launching a series of surgical strikes, claws aimed at the base of the skull, followed by a jaw attack to the neck. The python writhed, the bobcat held. The kill was swift. Experts called it a statistical anomaly. Others weren't so sure. In the weeks that followed, evidence of similar encounters surfaced. Partially consumed python remains near alligator nests, carcasses bearing claw marks attributed to Florida panthers, even a smaller python dragged off near a water channel used by otters. The quiet predators of the Everglades were watching, learning. Some biologists believed this was coincidence. Cold weather slowed the serpent. Opportunity favored the cat. But a growing number entertain a different perspective, that survival, when strained, forces adaptation not over centuries, but through necessity. What if native species are beginning to recognize the python's weakness? What if biological memory isn't limited to genetics, but to observation passed across generations? Whether miracle or anomaly, Loki's death marked the first time researchers had indisputable evidence that an apex invasive predator could fall to a native species, not through overwhelming force, but through precision. One veteran biologist only whispered 4 words after reviewing the footage. Nature finally hit back. While the footage of a bobcat dispatching a full-grown python shocked the world, researchers warned something far more sinister was at work, something too small for cameras to capture. What the python conquered through brute force, an invisible invader was erasing from within. The parasite, Rileyetiella orientalis, the snake lungworm, had begun to rewrite the Everglades' fate at a microscopic level. When scientists began studying dying native snakes, they expected trauma, dehydration, or starvation. What they found instead was a biological horror. During necropsies, as soon as the chest cavities were opened, pale, thread-like worms spilled from the lungs. Some snakes had over 100 living parasites embedded in their airways. One investigator described the scene as watching something suffocate from the inside out, long after the fight is over. Originally endemic to southeastern Asia, the lungworm evolved alongside the Burmese python. In its native environment, the python built resistance over generations, rarely displaying severe symptoms. But when it arrived in Florida, piggybacking on the invading serpents, it entered a food web unprepared to challenge it. Native snakes, corn snakes, rat snakes, pygmy rattlesnakes had no biological defense. Infection led to slowed movement, respiratory failure, and death by starvation or suffocation. The life cycle was brilliantly simple. 1. Python defecates. 2. Insects feed on the droppings. 3. Frogs and lizards consume the insects. 4. Native snakes eat the amphibians. 5. Larvae burrow into the lungs, mature, breed, and repeat. Subtle, efficient, lethal. Researchers watched in disbelief as the parasite began appearing miles outside python territory. One study found infection in native snakes captured more than 150 miles north of the python's known range. That was when the realization hit. The parasite no longer needs the python to survive. It had successfully jumped ship, embedding itself directly into Florida's native reptile population. Biologists described it not as an outbreak, but as a second invasion. This one silent, untraceable, potentially irreversible. Theories escalated. Could it adapt again? Could it shift from snakes to birds, mammals, humans? Experts insist the risk is low, but they admit they said the same thing about its jump from Asian pythons to Florida native. As if the ecological collapse wasn't enough, this microscopic adversary now threatens what little resilience remains. One indigenous snake species, the Florida cottonmouth, appears oddly resistant, igniting speculation. Its blood may hold the key to resistance, but resources are limited, and the parasite spreads unchecked. The python dominated through fear, the lungworm through persistence. And yet, while ecosystems collapsed, something unexpected began quietly unfolding. The slow return of an ancient predator once thought erased forever. What enters next isn't an invader, it's a rightful heir. When Florida officials announced they were releasing more snakes to combat the python crisis, the world erupted in laughter. Headlines mocked it as another Florida man experiment. Memes compared it to the cane toads in Australia and the mongoose disaster in Hawaii. But buried beneath the noise was a truth nearly 4 decades in the making. This wasn't a reckless gamble, it was a restoration. The snake they released wasn't another invader. It was the eastern indigo snake, an apex native species that had ruled southern forests long before humans carved roads through them. Known as Drymarchon cooperi, the indigo is the longest native snake in North America, reaching over 9 feet. Unlike pythons, it doesn't constrict, it doesn't rely on venom. When it hunts, it pins prey with sheer jaw force and swallows it alive, including venomous snakes. Even rattlesnakes, copperheads, and cottonmouths fall to it. It is immune to their venom. But by the late 1900s, habitat destruction and hunting decimated its numbers. It depended heavily on longleaf pine forests and gopher tortoise burrows, using the tortoises' tunnels as shelter. When pine forests were cleared and tortoises were hunted during the Great Depression, the indigo vanished. By 1978, it was federally listed as threatened. By the early 2000s, experts believed it was functionally extinct in most of North Florida. For decades, conservationists worked silently. They restored pockets of longleaf pine, reintroduced fire management, protected gopher tortoise habitats, and began a captive breeding program. By 2017, controlled releases began in the Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve, far north of the python invasion zone. At first, the results were slow. Snakes released were tagged, monitored, and watched. Some died, some vanished, but a small number adapted and survived. Then, in late 2023, something extraordinary happened. Trail cameras captured 2 small eastern indigo hatchlings, untagged. The significance was seismic. These snakes were born in the wild, not bred in captivity. For the first time in nearly 50 years, the emperor had not only returned, it was reproducing. In 2024 and 2025, more sightings followed. A strong 6-foot male observed moving with confidence. 19 snakes from earlier release years were still alive, forming a growing population. The restoration wasn't theoretical anymore. The ecosystem was beginning to function again, slowly, quietly, almost on nature's terms. Some scientists believe that if indigos continue pushing south and pythons continue drifting north, a meeting is inevitable. And unlike public hunters or drone surveillance, the indigo doesn't rely on tools. It relies on instinct honed over millennia. But the looming question lingers like mist over a swamp. Can the emperor stand against the invader that remade the land? Or worse, will it meet the parasite before it meets the python? By late 2025, experts quietly acknowledge what Florida has refused to admit publicly. This is no longer an invasion. It is an evolutionary standoff, a biological showdown between 3 forces rewriting the Everglades from 3 directions at once. The python continues its advance outward, growing in size, number, and confidence. For years, it shaped its control through silent dominance, suffocating prey, crushing competition, reshaping the land with no natural boundaries. The lungworm parasite expands in a different way, unseen, microscopic, moving north from host to host, breaking down the last defenses of native species already weakened by decades of ecological disruption. And now, slowly making its return, is the eastern indigo snake, the emperor, restored not as a weapon, but as a memory of how balance once kept power in check. Biologists Scientists now believe these three forces are on an inevitable collision course: the python spreading north from the Everglades, the indigo expanding south through restored pine corridors, and between them, the parasite creeping across counties, infecting host species along migration paths. Wildlife teams monitoring this progression speak in cautious tones. If the indigo reaches python territory first, it could trigger the first natural predator-to-predator confrontation in Florida's modern history, but if the parasite reaches the indigos before that meeting, their rebirth could be extinguished before it even begins. Some researchers argue that evolution favors resilience, that species surviving past extinction events may possess dormant immunity. There are whispers that the cottonmouth's strange resistance could hint that certain native species hold the biological key to mitigating the parasite. Optimists suggest the indigo snake may hold similar potential, that the emperor could arrive not just to challenge the python, but to stand against the parasite as well. Others reject this as wishful thinking, pointing to historical failures, where human intervention often accelerates collapse rather than repairs it. Yet, deep in the swamps, something remarkable is happening. More sightings of apex natives confronting smaller pythons are being documented, bobcats studying from the edges, alligators waiting longer before striking, even panthers adapting their stalking patterns. It is not an uprising, it is something colder, an ecosystem quietly relearning how to fight. The final question, the one scientists avoid voicing on record, lingers over every research expedition. When the emperor finally meets the invader, will it slash the serpent or fall to the parasite first? Because the python kills by force, the parasite kills by decay, and the indigo, the symbol of restoration, walks toward both without knowing which fate awaits. This isn't closure, it's the opening move of a three-way war nature never asked for. What happens next? Recovery? Collapse? Or something stranger? A new balance born from destruction? Let us know your theory below. And subscribe if you believe nature hasn't spoken its last word.